Hi, my name is Tiffany, and this is my film review presentation. So, the movie that I decided to do for the film review was This Boy's Life. It's starring Robert De Niro, Ellen Barkin, and Leonardo DiCaprio. The movie is set in 1957, and it's actually based off of a memoir by Tobias Wolff. He's a famous author and English professor at Stanford. So the movie starts off with Toby and his mom, Caroline, driving from Florida to Utah. Toby, the narrator, tells us that Caroline's boyfriend, Roy, recently beat her up, prompting their move. The plan in Utah is to look for uranium so they can get rich. Shortly after arriving, Roy shows up and begins asking Caroline about her work. He's managed to get their phone number, their address, and invites himself in for dinner. After this happens, he begins watching her at work, pretty much stalking her. And Caroline, terrified, decides to take Toby and move to Washington. Once they get to Washington, she meets a man named Dwight. She starts dating him. Toby is instantly not a fan of Dwight and starts impersonating him for Caroline and her friends, trying to poke fun at him and things like that. Toby, at the same time, is starting to have some behavioral issues. He's stolen a car and crashed it with his friends. He's smoking, stealing money, and his most recent issue is carving obscenities into the bathroom at school. Caroline, pretty much at her wit's end, tells him that her and Dwight are planning on getting married and that Toby is going to go live with Dwight after Christmas for a few months to see if it can be successful. If it is, then they're going to get married. Toby goes to Dwight's and the abuse pretty much immediately starts. Dwight tells him that he's going to fix his bad boy, tells him that he has to either cure him or kill him. Some of the things that he has Toby doing is hauling around barrels of horse chestnuts. He signs him up for Boy Scouts and also a paper route. Interestingly, though, Toby doesn't receive any of the money from his paper route, and also the uniforms for Boy Scouts. Toby got stuck with a hand-me-down that doesn't fit him, and Dwight got a brand new uniform. So the arrangement is successful despite all of the verbal abuse that Toby experiences. But once they get married, you see the abuse start to intensify. Dwight kind of starts increasing his level of verbal abuse, calling Toby a sissy and calling him by women's names. One night, Toby goes joyriding and Dwight finds out, and this is the first time that we see Dwight physically assault Toby. During all of this, Mom is refusing to get involved. She says she won't referee and that she needs this to work. Also, too, JFK is running for office at this time, and Mom wants to participate in the campaign, but Dwight tells her, absolutely not. You can't do that. He's very much concerned about his perception to others. He's worried about looking masculine and in charge of his family and wanting to be the best at everything. Toby, kind of getting sick of it all, comes up with a plan to apply for prep school because his older brother, who he doesn't talk to, went to prep school and is doing well. So Toby gets the admission papers sent. Dwight finds them and he's jealous because this is something that he never got to do and he doesn't want anybody else to have it. He throws the papers away and tells Toby that he's doing him a favor because he'll never get in. This is where the climax of the movie happens. Toby has applied to prep school and gets the paperwork letting him know that he made it in. Dwight, enraged, looking for any reason that he can to kind of go at it with Toby, finds a mustard jar that Toby's thrown away and says that it wasn't actually empty. This mustard jar is then used to assault Toby. Dwight shoves it in his face, but today is the day that Toby fights back, and it kind of propels them into this huge physical altercation that culminates with Dwight nearly choking Toby to death. We see Caroline come from the back and she hits Dwight with a baseball bat over the head and lets him know that if he ever tries to come after them or talk to them again, that she'll kill him. So the movie ends with Toby and Caroline kind of finding their freedom. Caroline has plans to move to DC for a job, and Toby is en route to prep school. Unfortunately, at the end of the movie, we do find out that Toby got expelled from prep school, so he ended up joining the military. So throughout the movie, we see some different forms of abuse that I just want to quickly highlight. For Toby, we see physical abuse. There's a litany of scenes in which we see punching, slapping, kicking, and then, of course, the climax at the end in which we see Toby being choked. Toby also experiences a lot of psychological abuse, and I would say this is the main form of abuse that he experiences, one of which being terrorizing. So in the movie, we pretty much see every scene with Dwight and Toby, Dwight constantly yelling at him and threatening to harm him. We also see rejecting. There were 3 other children in the household who didn't experience any abuse that we see. Toby was always the target. We also see whenever Toby talks about applying to prep school, Dwight just immediately tells him that he'll never get in. He's not smart enough. He's not good enough. We also see degrading. Dwight is always telling Toby what a bad kid he is and name calling him. He even starts referring to him as women's names. There's just constant criticism. Toby can't catch a break. We also see exploiting at the end of the movie. So Dwight reveals to us that instead of saving Toby's paper route money like he said he was, he's actually been using it to pay for things in the household. I also want to highlight just some of the things that Caroline experienced. So with Roy, there was the obvious physical abuse that Toby told us about, but we also see whenever Roy shows up to Utah and he's in the house, he pretty much coerces Caroline into having sex with him by just being unrelenting and not willing to take no for an answer, and she just agrees to do so just to get him out of the house. We also see with Dwight some sexual abuse. So after their wedding night, they're in their room trying to have sex, and Caroline's asking him to face her. She wants to see his face, and Dwight gets pretty irate with her and tells her he doesn't want to look at her and she'll be in whatever position that he wants because it's his house and he does what she says. We also see some degradation at the end of the movie whenever she's trying to leave. Dwight accuses her of running off with another man to DC and calls her a whore and things like that. So I also wanted to take just a minute to talk about the responses to the abuse because I feel that they accurately captured how it would happen in real life. With Toby, one of the things is his attempt to be compliant with Dwight's expectations. So with the Boy Scouts and the paper route, Toby tried really hard to kind of measure up to what Dwight was expecting, but just because of Dwight's behavior, Toby eventually lost interest and knew it didn't matter what he did. He could never measure up. We also see the externalizing behaviors continue. We see Toby continuing to smoke and skip school and just engage in some problematic behavior. Interestingly, there was no internalized behaviors, so we don't see any anxiety or depression being experienced by Toby, which I think is important because the lack of internalized behaviors indicates that emotionally, he knows that the abuse is not his fault. And in fact, throughout the movie, we see Toby hold Dwight accountable for the abuse time and time again. I also think it's important to point out that Toby did seek out positive relationships and protective factors, one of which being a kid named Arthur who he was friends with, and Arthur actually helped him get into prep school. Additionally, Toby always maintained that positive relationship with his mom despite her unwillingness to get involved. And then the protective factor being the prep school. Toby knew that his brother went there and he did well, and he kind of recognized that as his way out. For Caroline, again, what was hit the nail on the head was her refusal to get involved. She didn't want to make waves. She didn't want to ruin the relationship because she was worried about her ability to care for Toby and provide for him like she needed to without the support of Dwight. And then, again, what I think was accurate was the decision to leave. She recognized that her son was in immediate danger and things were coming to a head, and it was either get out or experience, some abuse that cannot be undone. So I just also wanted to talk about the systems that were in place that were shown in a helping capacity in the movie, and unfortunately there were none. So in my opinion, some of the systems that should have been there would first and foremost be the school. The school, I believe, is a connecting piece for families who are experiencing issues like this, as they have access to records. And so particularly for Toby, they could have seen the instability that he was dealing with, that the family is just chronically moving and they never stay any place very long. Because the school never really assessed anything below surface level and just resorted to discipline and punishment, we never really get to see the child welfare system get involved, which is unfortunate because the child welfare system would have been able to provide some supportive services like counseling, batterer intervention programs, and if Caroline and Toby, had decided to leave, then they could have helped with accessing things like housing, transportation assistance, food assistance, and things like that. And just a final note is the lack of law enforcement presented in the film was interesting to me because we frequently see Dwight with a drink in his hand. He's shown drinking and driving and being publicly intoxicated. And again, it was just interesting to me that with all of this man's, erratic behavior, there was never any formal system in place aside from the Boy Scouts, which is only briefly presented in the movie. Overall, it was a good movie and I would recommend it to anyone.